So it seems my previous video got cut off, so I'm going to continue on talking about for loop. So with for loops, you basically need to have a sequence, all right? And so, for instance, a string is a sequence, list, tuple, those are sequences. They have order and they have specific number of items. So with for loop, you need to have a sequence. And if you have a sequence, you exactly know how many items, for instance, you have, and you can go about trading over different items, taking one item at a time, and then until you get to the last item in your sequence, okay? Or however you want to traverse over that sequence, okay? If you want to, for instance, jump to every time, or if you want to just simply go through each of the items, traverse over all of them until you get to the end of it. Or if you want to go reverse, for instance, you have a sequence and you want to, let's say, print all of items from end of it all the way to the beginning of it, right? You can do it. As long as you have that sequence, you can set your for loop to do whatever you want, okay? So the must with a for loop is you need to have a sequence, right? And so far, we learned about 3 different sequences that you can use to create a for loop: string, list, and tuples, right? If you do not have a sequence, you can easily create one for a for loop, okay? And I will go over traversing over sequences that we already know and also creating a sequence for your for loop using a range function, okay? So to go back to the PowerPoint slides that I uploaded for this chapter, I want to very quickly talk about definite and indefinite loops. Remember, with a while loop, I told you that you can create whatever loops that you want. So it doesn't matter if you want to create a definite loop or indefinite loop, all right? You can use a while loop to create whatever you want. But with for loop, the only kind of loops that you can create using a for loop is definite loops, the ones that you know exactly how many times you want to iterate over, how many times you want to repeat certain instructions. And if you remember, we work with sequences, we know exactly how many items we have. So remember, if you have a for loop, your instruction, your loop setup, your for loop setup is creating a definite loop, all right? All right, so now let's see some example for loop. And I'm going to take the example that we did in previous video to print numbers from 5 to 1 and use for loop to create the exact same thing and using different methods for that. First, I'm going to use a sequence to do it, and then I'm going to use a range function to do the exact same thing. So again, to emphasize, when you want to print numbers from 5 to 1, that is an example of definite loop. You know exactly 5 times that you want to repeat some instructions, right? So that is a definite loop because you're repeating something, for instance, 5 times or 10 times or 100 times, all right? You know the exact number of the repetitions, the looping kind that is happening, right? Since this example of definite loop, you can easily use a for loop to create that. And to be honest, if you have a definite loop structure, it is much easier to go with for loop, right? So now let's see an example of that. So I'm going to take this part, I'm going to comment it for now, and I'm going to use for loop to create that. To create a for loop, similar to anything else, you need a keyword. The keyword for that is for, all right? Simple enough. And then after you have your keyword, you need to say, all right, what is my sequence? All right. So for here, I'm going to go about and create a sequence. I'm going to create a list with all the items that I want to print in it. All right. All right, so I created this list and I stored 5 different items in it. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. These are the items that I wanted to print. If I simply, instead of having any loop, if I say print LSD, I'm going to see the list that is printed. Okay, I'm seeing one item, which is a list with all of the elements it has in it. All right, but I do not want to see it as the list itself. I want to see each item in that list. So to do that, to access each item in a sequence, the best way to do it is to traverse over that sequence and simply go and print or add something to it, for instance, or do something with that element. Okay, it's up to you. For the teaching purposes, I'm using print function, but that doesn't mean you always have to print the items that you have in a sequence. You can, for instance, add to it and then print it, or add all of the items to each other. Okay, there's always a reason that you're traversing over sequence. In this example, for now, I'm just going to print them to see if we can access those items from that sequence. All right, now let's go about and try to print each item in that sequence using a for loop. Again, we are going to say for, which is our keyword, and then the next thing that you are going to have here is very interesting. So you're going to go about and pick a variable name. This could be any name, similar to creating any other variable. For now, I'm going to call it item. All right, so the variable name that I'm creating is called item. I'm saying for this variable item in, which is a membership operator, in a sequence. And my sequence here is the list that I have, right, which is my sequence. I'm saying simply create this variable and go into this sequence and step by step just move forward, take each item from this list and assign it to item. All right, and then after you do it, just simply print item. All right, so what is going to happen is in the first iteration, my item is going to be assigned value 5 because that is the first item that we have in sequence list. Okay, so my item is 5 and 5 is going to be printed. The next time that I come back here, my item is going to take another value, and that is the next item that I have in list. The next item that I have in list is 4, so item is going to be 4. And then I go in, I'm going to print 4, and then I'm going to come back here. The thing that for loop checks is it wants to make sure you haven't got to the end of that sequence. All right, I still have more items, so I'm good to go. So the next, I'm assigning 3 to item, so haven't reached the end. I'm going to print 3, and then next time I come, I assign 2 to item, haven't reached the end yet, print item. The next, I'm going to assign 1 to it, haven't reached the end, print item. And the next time that I come, now I reach the end of that sequence. There's no more item left, so you're done. For loop is ended there. All right, so basically with for loop, unlike while, it knows exactly how many items you have in that sequence and it knows when to stop. So you don't need to put any stopping condition similar to while loop. You just go about your sequence, say, all right, I want you to assign all the items in the sequence that I have one by one into item. And each of those assignments are going to be one of your iterations, okay? The first item is going to be your first iteration. Second item is going to be your second iteration, and so on and so forth, okay? So it knows how many items exactly you have in that sequence and how it needs to go about traversing over all of those items. So now let's run this code, see what we get. I assume we should get 5 to 1, okay? So the first, as we showed, the first item in that sequence was 5. So you got 5 is printed and go all the way until you get to the end of that sequence. Again, it's going to work with any type of sequence, okay? So if I change this one to a tuple, you're going to get the exact same outcome. I changed the name of my sequence. I forgot to change the name of it here, okay? LST does not exist, so it says the name LST is not defined. So I need to change whatever sequence I plan to traverse over. If it doesn't exist, I'm going to get error message, all right? Since my sequence is called S now, or let's go with sequence, then I should use that name to traverse over my sequence. All right, so now let's see. Oh, okay, here. Actually, I do not need this line at all. I don't want to print my sequence. Okay, here you go. Right, so you see it works for either tuple or list. Both are sequence and it should work fine. If I change this one, instead of having a tuple or sequence, if I change it to a string, if I have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in it, so this is a sequence that I have. If I go and run it, I'm going to get the exact same output because again, it's a sequence. It knows I need to start from the first item and goes all the way to the end of that sequence. So one more time, just to recap how for loop works, you need to have a sequence, all right? And then you simply use keyword for. You need to give a variable name, all right? So this variable is going to be created right here, all right? So this is just a name that doesn't exist in your program because if it does, you're overriding that variable. So in every iteration, it's going to assign a new value to this item depending on how many items you have in your sequence. And I'm simply saying in this slide, I'm saying for all of the items that you have in a sequence, take them and assign them one by one into this item, okay, into this variable item. And then go inside that for loop and just follow the instruction. All right, until you get to the end of that sequence. But up to that point, I want to just keep going.